Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Digital Health February Symposium. My name is Jerry Antimano. I'm the Community Development Manager at HITLAB. I'm keeping the chair warm for Dr. Stan Kachnowski, Chair of HITLAB, who is eminently coming on. But I will get the show started as we have a really jam-packed schedule ahead of us today. We would like to thank our sponsors, the Merck Global Health Innovation Fund, Goodwin Procter, FFF Enterprises, the HTech Collaborative from AARP, who we ran a joint pitch competition that concluded last week, which is hugely successful. And you can see the live stream recording on our YouTube channel, as well as Medikarma, who we'd like to thank for helping us put on the show for today. I do want to just quickly let everybody know that we will be doing our first book giveaway for 2023. Joris van Dam, who we will hear from later on with Zina Manji, has kindly donated a couple of his books, Digital Therapeutics. There is a discount code on the screen as well as in the chat for you to purchase the book at 20% discount. But stay tuned, there will be some trivia questions, and the first attendee to punch in the right answer into the chat will win a copy of Joris's book. So without further ado, as I mentioned, we have a packed schedule. So we'd like to get on to our first panelists of the day as we open up our February Digital Health Symposium on the next phase of digital health, the conversations around artificial intelligence, machine learning, the metaverse, and beyond. So we'd love to welcome to the podium frequent flyer of the Digital Health Symposium and staunch supporter of HITLAB, Bill Taranto, who is the president of the Merck Global Health Innovation Fund, as well as president and chair of the HITLAB Breakthrough Alliance, who will be interviewing Eric Novik from Generable. Bill, are you there?
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Those of you joining HITLAB today from wherever you're calling in, it's always a pleasure to be here every month to interview someone new. And I'm really excited today to interview Eric Novik, who's founder and CEO of Generable. And I think we're gonna have a nice, quick conversation, but a telling conversation. So Eric, thank you for joining today. I really appreciate it. I always like to start the conversation off. We always have a pretty broad audience, but for those who don't know about you, can you tell them a little bit about your journey from being a statistician to an entrepreneur and then now CEO of Generable?
Yeah, sure, Bill. Thanks again for having me on, first of all. So I'm a relatively late arrival to both the field of statistics and probability and entrepreneurship. I was, I think my late 20s or 30s, I was trading derivatives, trading options, and I knew enough to understand I didn't know enough probability. And so I took a class in statistics like the first time, and I completely fell in love with that subject. And then later on went to grad school at Columbia, where I studied probability and statistics. And while there, I've met my first co-founder, and we started a company that was in the fintech space, where we analyzed some options trading activity to help people figure out the risks of these different options positions. That didn't go very far, but I learned a lot through that experience. And then later, also at Columbia, I met some people who developed this new around 2015 probabilistic programming language called STAN, which is a pretty amazing technology. And we started a company around that. And in 2017, we went through the Techstars New York accelerator, and we've been working in early drug development and oncology basically since that time.
Okay, well, good. That's a great journey, and really excited about my next question because what Merck does around both oncology and cardiology. But can you tell me more broadly about Generable and how you're helping patients in both oncology and cardiology?
Yeah, so in the oncology space, we kind of work in this relatively early phase of drug development when the first in human trials start. So when you still have very few patients, but you're starting dosing patients, and then through to about phase 2. When all the consequential decisions about what treatments to take forward in large registration trials are made. And in fact, if you look at like an oncology space overall, that's it's very, very heavily invested, but it has a tremendously high failure rate, very, very late in the process, right? And so what we do is we try to shine a light relatively early to kind of denoise the signal and help companies to kind of figure out what is likely to work and for whom it's likely to work. And so, our work in oncology is just generally in that kind of just internal decision making of the lots of portfolio candidates and trying to figure out what's going on. In cardiology, we are starting to look at the clinical use case, which is very, very interesting. Turns out the structure of the models that we use there are very similar, even though it's not very related in terms of therapeutic area, but structurally models very similar. And there we're looking at anticoagulant medication that is given post-MI. Somebody has a heart attack, they put onto anticoagulant. And the challenge there is that what this anticoagulant medication does, it's supposed to prevent clotting, so it's supposed to prevent stroke, but it induces additional risk of bleeding. So you have to be very careful how you dose. And today, clinicians don't have good guidelines for this kind of more precision dosing. And as you age, you change the propensity towards that risk. And so we're developing essentially a set of models that would help clinicians figure out what is the best dose given both the risk of stroke and the risk of bleed.
Okay. So, obviously your probably bigger customers are pharma and biotech. How do they actually engage and work with you?
So there are essentially two modes in which we are working with these customers. So in one area, we essentially do R&D work. So as you can imagine, and like Merck is a perfect example of that, is a large company that's interested in finding better methods for selecting better candidates early, right? And in fact, we are working with Merck. We're going to have a couple of publications coming out with the early oncology group at Merck later this year. And those tend to be kind of R&D collaborations, right? So they run just like an R&D type of an engagement where, we do a lot of retrospective studies and simulation studies in completed clinical trials and figure out if the methods that we're developing that we think are good, right, are actually good, right? So we have to do a lot of work to prove that out. And we've now done that with several companies, including with Merck. We published that kind of research in peer-reviewed journals. We sort of improve the methodology that way. So that's kind of one way in which we engage, and that tends to be with like larger companies that tend to have this the large portfolios and are able to do that. In the other way in which we work is in kind of prospective trial evaluations, right? So now, like, we validated some of these models, and we are pretty confident that they're doing a good job. And so a company that is now doing prospective trials is engaging with us to actually assess, as the data is coming out from their phase 1 and phase 2, we kind of supplement their internal team, and we bring a lot of know-how in the therapeutic area and a lot of the models to basically in close to real time, not of course not in real time, but close to the time that it needed for the trial to execute, produce these predictions and let them kind of decipher how good their compounds are working. because at that time they don't have control arms, right? And maybe just treatments. So we were able to benchmark them against other compounds that we know how they work, and provide some benchmarking, create these synthetic populations, synthetic controls, digital twins, and things like that, and give them a lot more insight. And in that sense, we engage like a typical sort of tech-enabled service, where we would, charge some amount per month per sort of treatment arm, and do it that way.
So I'm curious, there's always been a lot of talk about how we're, and I think we're getting closer and closer to personalized medicine, and Generable is a really interesting company that's pushing that forward. But I'm curious, as you use, as you're applying computational methods to drug discovery and clinical care, right? What are some of the sort of challenges and opportunities you see in using these type of technologies?
Yeah, so I'll talk about the sort of opportunities first, because I'm an optimist, and then challenges second. So I think opportunities are immense, and in particular, so first of all, we don't work in drug discovery, right? We don't discover new molecules. So obviously there's a big opportunity right now with some of the new sort of AI tools and so on to kind of find better targets and so on. We're not involved in that process. But what we found is that even with the existing molecules, even with the existing products today, we can do a lot better. We can reduce failure rates. We can better select patients. There's a lot more we can do even with the existing therapies. And this is where, particularly like in the oncology space, we see this opportunity to relatively early avoid these very, very costly mistakes where you enroll patients in very large trials that are basically futile, right? And so you incur enormous human cost and opportunity cost of capital and so on. So that's sort of one area where we think there's a tremendous opportunity. On the clinical side, there's also a very interesting, and I kind of like laid out a specific use case in cardiology. There are lots of others, but the challenge here, and we see this a lot, is that naive application of like AI and naive application of these methods is likely to produce horrible results. And we still remember like IBM Watson. Everybody likes to like make fun of them now, but like that was a disaster, right? Like it was overspent. There was basically no value delivered. And unfortunately, we see some companies today, that some of them are pretty well funded, that are developing these kind of risks, clinical risk scores that take this AI naive approach. And I'm sort of a little bit scared about what they're going to do if they're going to try to risk score me. And I'll give you a very specific example very quickly to understand what kind of thing you may liable to find. Suppose you look at ER data, collect a whole bunch of data from observational data from ERs, and we want to assess each person on their likelihood of some cardiovascular event. And if you do that, here's what you're going to find in that data. People who are taller are going to have more cardiovascular risk. And you say, well, how is that? What does the height have to do with it? Well, if you're a statistician, you already know where I'm going with this. But basically, if you just blindly correlate this, you're going to find that relationship. I don't need to collect data to tell you that it's going to be there. Why? Because people who are taller are also older, and older people have more cardiovascular events than younger people. So you have to control for the person's age if you're going to develop a model for cardiovascular risk. So you say, oh, I know, I'm just going to throw every variable that I collect. I'm going to throw that all in so I don't miss anything. And what's going to happen then is and I'm not going to give you a specific example here not to bore you, but basically if you include everything, there are certain types of things that you include in the mix that will actually remove this relationship. So it'll actually reverse the cause that you're trying to assess. So people who are working in this observational data and the building models, they have to be aware of the causal structure in the data. It's actually not in the data. You have to impose it. And unfortunately, it's not yet in their routine practice. And so if you're interested in that area, I highly recommend a book by Judea Pearl called The Book of Why. He's a computer scientist who's been working in causality for a very long time. I think that's one of the biggest challenges that I see. We still have a blind spot there.
Well, thanks, Eric. As chairman of the Breakthrough Alliance at HITLAB, I always like to ask one HITLAB related question. And I'm just curious on your thoughts on how do you see HITLAB helping digital health companies?
Yeah, so I think it's basically two ways. So for small companies like ours, right, that we don't have a lot of staff who can do market analysis, and it's just because you have some great new tool or great innovation doesn't mean anybody's going to buy. We know, unless you have something like ChatGPT. Unfortunately, I don't have anything as cool as that. So if you have something like more complicated, more nuanced, right, you need to really understand the whole universe of players there. And, HITLAB would be very helpful in understanding that market landscape in general. They'll probably do a better job being specialized in healthcare than like a generalist like Gartner or something like that. And the second is, once you figure out that market landscape, how is it that our specific offerings fits into that, right? Who would be the most likely buyer? Why would they buy? All that is very complicated. It's not obvious. All of us who work in healthcare innovation know that. We've been struggling with that, and any help that that we can get is very, very valuable. I think HITLAB is perfectly positioned to offer that kind of help.
Well, thank you so much, Eric. I appreciate your time. Again, these always go fast. I only have 15 minutes, but really a fascinating discussion, and congratulations on what you've accomplished with Generable. And with that, I'll bring back in Stan, who I see has joined, to take back over.
Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, Eric. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.